Welcome to the Silver Report Uncut. Now, I wanted to dig a little bit deeper into this very important subject. One of my subscribers brought something to my attention. Now, the video yesterday, it was titled Thousands of Acres of Corn That Is Unplanted. Now, the reason that I said thousands is because within that video, there was thousands of acres, at least within the footage I shot. That is what I witnessed. It is an enormous amount of unplanted acreage of corn. Now, the corn that is planted, because there was some planted throughout a couple states midway, and the problem is that the corn was so small, it was literally only 6 inches or so off the ground. It was barely even visible. At this point, we're coming up on the 4th of July, and it should be knee-high. Now, that's not just a saying. That's what is required to be able to get a good yield whenever you come to harvest. So, for the most part, farmers have given up. They're not planting at all. So, they brought up a very important point, and that is the fact that there are millions of acres that are going to go unplanted this year. So, let's talk about what is planted and how things are going out, because the numbers, they are far exaggerated about what this season is going to produce. And so a couple subscribers brought up some valid points, and let's get into those for just 1 minute, because someone said, well, I don't really eat corn. I understand. Some people don't really eat much vegetables at all. Do you read everything you eat, however? Now, a lot of people, they eat processed food, microwavable foods, foods that you can cook in 5 minutes, or things just whip together on the stove. You would be surprised how much of what we eat is made up of corn. Do you eat cereal in the morning? Most of the cereals on the shelves are made up of corn. And some people brought up some very important problems that we have with that, because this corn, we don't even know if it's safe for consumption, but still it fills our lives. More than that, fuel, ethanol. If you take a look next time you're at the gas pump, you'll be surprised how many of the gas stations, they have at least 15% ethanol in their fuel. Now, we also have these flex fuel vehicles, and, they have different octanes that they can use and it's a little bit cheaper, 10 cents, 20 cents. They're really not much of a difference. Either way, they are, because they have extra ethanol, and the cars are designed to take ethanol. So much of your life revolves around the corn crop being good. So you might not know this, but all of that corn is not even produced for human consumption. Let me give you an example. There are some states, their entire corn production, it goes to seed corn. They use it to feed the cattle, their animals, things like this. In fact, most of the animals in the U.S. with modern agriculture, the way that they do this, these food farms, they essentially feed them a diet of only corn. That's the issue that we're having these days, is that animals aren't supposed to eat corn, but that's a whole nother issue altogether. And the second major reason we need to produce so much corn is the fact that there is these huge subsidies from the government for farmers when they produce corn. Now, this is produced for ethanol, energy security, but there's entire farms, a lot of these farms perhaps, that their entire focus is devoted to producing corn for this benefit. Now, this volume of farmland and the extra supply that was supposed to last for years, as well as trade, that was all wiped out as a result of this, it's a serious problem. Good. So we talk about oversupply. That was another good point. And so we did have a good supply. Now we look at what happened as a result of the rains, because we see a lot of that supply was destroyed. We did have a stockpile, but a lot of those silos, a lot of that storage of grains and corn and all of that is wiped out. This was literally years worth of supply that is just gone. And we have nothing coming in this year. This is what makes this a particularly serious issue. Now, massive volumes of farms within the middle of the U.S., they're not able to be planted still to this point. In fact, millions of acres of farmland will have nothing planted on them at all for 2019. You could see that farmers have given up by the fact that cover crops are already planted. This is a very serious problem. Now, the interesting thing is, the people who took the larger loss will be the farmers that actually got seeds planted into the ground, because we talk so much about the unplanted ground and the farmers, the difficulties that they're going to face ahead, the fact that we have these record farm bankruptcies already, but the difficulties they'll face in the fact that they did not get their fields planted. The fields sit idle, bills got to get paid, debts got to get paid. But even worse, those that spent the extra money on seeds to plant out hundreds of acres, and the fact is, they are simply not going to get a yield this year. At this point, they are just desperate, hoping that something will grow. Now here's a problem that a lot of people haven't touched on yet. Even if we get perfect weather conditions for the rest of the summer, even if the rains they stop, there is no way at this point that we are going to have even fields ready before the frost comes. We're not going to have, corn ready to be harvested. It is at this point too late. The corn crop for 2019 in the United States is absent. In fact, this potentially could be the most widespread crop failures in the entire history of the U.S., and we've gone through some difficult times before. Now, I wanted to show you this because it was this photo that actually moved me so much. Now, this is from a couple in Indiana named Kyle and Tori Klein. This was shared on Facebook, and what it reveals, for example, is that last summer, the corn was nearly above his head. Now, the way he worded it was that most of the corn around his area is lucky to be out of the ground, let alone knee-high. And the way he closed off his interview was that this year is going to be one to remember. Now, it's not just there. There's some other disturbing pictures we see in Indiana, and we compare June of 2018 to what we are seeing for June 2019. We also look at Nebraska, and June 2018 was an amazing year. Actually, it was quite normal. And this year, we see the results are just not the same. Also in Kansas, the same situation. We are just not seeing anything coming above the ground. It is not, even those who got planted, they're even worse off. They spent thousands of dollars possibly on seeds and have nothing to show for it. For the most part, and I hate to say it, but the way that the agricultural business works in the U.S. is that farmers every year take out loans in order to purchase their seeds. So many of these farmers have taken out loans to be able to sow these fields, and they are just not going to be getting a harvest this year. Now, let's just face it. No plants actually like to grow in mud. No plants like to grow in extremely soggy conditions. Their roots will rot. You will have your plants, they just won't make it. This is something that is very serious because even though that people have plants growing, they're just not going to produce. It's very interesting because I have been working with this blueberry bush that I had planted for years. Now, this is the second year. It has really had no growth, and this year the leaves were very yellow. They were yellowing, and I couldn't figure out why. I added some acidifier to the soil just to try to make it more comfortable. I figured it was nutritional. Something was wrong. And then I discovered that it had been raining so much that water happened to be pooling right around the base of that plant. So the problem that the plant had was it was just having too much water. So you just imagine the amount of water some of these states are getting. They are just not happy plants. Now, I did need to dig that bush up and move it because it simply was not going to be able to grow there. Now, J.P. Morgan has been getting louder and louder with these warnings over the U.S. economy. We've seen Mike Wilson. He has come out with a number of different warnings to investors about what is coming for the U.S. stock market. Now, he added about the interest rate cuts that the case for a material upside in the U.S. stocks right now is getting harder. And the problem is the U.S. economy is experiencing a material slowdown, and it has run too hot last year. This slowdown is now manifesting itself in poor earnings growth, deteriorating economic conditions. He said if the Fed is cutting rates because it's truly the end of the cycle, rather than the Fed simply taking out insurance against the outcome, it has much different implications for equity markets. So the evidence is building that it's the former rather than the latter. Now here's the really concerning thing, because we see not only did the New York Fed's manufacturing index, it plummeted, right? So the Philadelphia Fed's manufacturing index, it also fell. In fact, for the New York Fed, they had the largest drop on record. And now the Dallas Fed released their manufacturing survey, and it has crashed from negative 5.3 to negative 12.1. So this was much, much lower than expectations. It's also the lowest level going back to June 2016. Now, their business activity outlook, it also has crashed. The truckers' sentiment has crashed by the most on record. So the Case Freight Index, It's now down 6.5% year over year. Just last month, it was down 3.5% year over year. So we are continuing to see the data deteriorate. And there is perhaps no broader measure of economic activity for the United States than freight shipments. This index has been falling, and it is still accelerating. Now, the crazy part is how much of a scene this all is becoming. All right, thank you guys for joining us here at the Silver